Hey everyone, this is part 2 of our lecture on the Baroque in Europe. And I was watching this old recording of this lecture. I do that every time as I'm preparing for lecture. I go back and look at an old recording just to remind myself of what it is that I want to say during that recording. And understand, the Baroque is a period of Western art that I absolutely love. I adore the hell out of this work that we're going to be talking about. And in watching the video of my older, well, I guess my younger self talking about this work, that younger version of me was so energetic and so passionate about what he was talking about that I was getting into that. And I was thinking to myself, I don't believe I have a similar energy right now. I don't think I can quite bolster that same amount of energy. And it would be a shame if I weren't giving you that. So I'm going to go back to that old recording at this point. Um, Eventually, I promise you'll finally get a week where all of the recording is brand new. But this week, I want to give you this old recording. And again, it's for a reason. It's a quality control reason. I just don't think I have the same kind of energy that this Jason, who's like 2 years younger, had. At least not this week. I'm kind of tired this week. And yeah, it would be a shame not to give you the same amount of energy. So anyway, let's dive right in. Let's move into first talking about Artemisia Gentileschi, born in 1593 and died in 1663. That's a pretty good long life. But you see, 1593, she is a child at the time that Caravaggio is doing his stuff. And she's looking at his work and is enthralled by it. So Gentileschi travels around and she painted both in Florence and in Rome. And in both of cities, she became highly praised and sought after artist and becomes an absolute celebrity artist in her time. It's in the midst of the Counter-Reformation, as I just mentioned. There are wealthy patrons in the church in Italy, she's Italian, who want work that looks like what she's producing. And interestingly, you have to understand that she is living at a time when women, for the most part, weren't allowed to do this kind of thing. Gentileschi had the good fortune of having a father who was also a Baroque painter, who wanted her to be trained in art since she showed a proclivity for it. And we're pretty sure that she worked in his workshop, and so when we look at a lot of her father's work, we believe that, especially early on, that there are probably some areas that she herself would have painted in that. When I get to Rembrandt, I'll talk about this more in depth. The idea of artist as a brand, as opposed to the artist as the singular person who makes the painting. So yeah, so she had that fortune, was trained in such a way that she became this great artist in her own right, and she was very fortunate in ways that other women who were trained in the arts weren't, because their training couldn't be done in the schools of the time. Now, she was fortunate. She lived in Bologna, which was a little more liberal, and allowed her to get that training from the teachers that her father hired. And boy, is there a story when it comes to the teachers, but we'll get to that in a moment. And she actually, interestingly, because so many women artists of the time would have a really great early career, and then their fathers would marry them off to someone, and then suddenly the career just comes to an end. Interestingly, she continued her work, excuse me, throughout her life, even after she got married to a husband who, by all accounts, didn't object to her occupation. And many men did. Many men did not like the idea of being married to a woman who was an artist, because art was considered man's work. So for many men, that felt like they were being diminished as men. And I know, it was the 1600s. What can I say? I mean, hell, surely men who have had that problem to this day. Right? A lot of men to this day don't like it if they have a wife who works a job where she makes more money than him. That irks a lot of people, right? And so it was even more so at this particular moment in time when women were considered the property of their fathers until they were married off, at which point they became property of their husbands. Gentileschi here broke that mold. She refused to fit that mold, which makes this painting right here, her self-portrait right here, particularly funny because there's so much snark in that. She becomes known for her amazing portrayals of female empowerment that are unlike anything that her male contemporaries are doing. In her self-portrait here, she paints herself the way a man might paint her. Right? She's sitting here playing her instrument. Nope, she's not holding on to actual paint and canvas and stuff, the tools of her trade. She's playing a musical instrument. And yep, there's that cleavage. No denying it. It's right there. It's front and center. She's playing around that same tenebrism as Caravaggio. And no doubt about it, the light was meant to hit that cleavage, right? She is showcasing the way men would want to look at and portray her. But then look at her face. That face. Really? This is what you think? This is what you want to see? Fuck you. Like that's the that's the face that she's got right there, and I love it. I absolutely love that face. All right. So when I say this woman painted images of female empowerment, I'm not kidding around. This is one of her most famous pieces, Judith slaying Holofernes, from circa 1625. Okay, so the Book of Judith, the story of Judith, the Book of Judith is a deuterocanonical book. It's not in the Protestant Bible. It is in the Catholic Bible. And Judith tells the story of that takes place during the Hebrew captivity in Babylon. And Holofernes is this particularly ruthless king that is just horrible to the Hebrew people. And Judith takes it upon herself to go in, seduce Holofernes, give that man the ride of his life that night until Holofernes is just worn out. And then she and her handservant cut his head off, murder him, execute him, assassinate him, and then go run to the protection of others to finally get rid of this horrible person who had been causing so many. She was sort of seen as a liberator of the Hebrews that were under this man. Now, when other painters approached the story of Judith, we would often get something like this. This is Giorgione's painting. Now, granted, this is quite a bit earlier than when she's painting, but still, this is indicative of what was happening in the Renaissance, the high into the late Renaissance. This is Giorgione's painting of Judith with the head of Holofernes, right? And look at her, right? She's been painted the way Giorgione thinks a woman should look, right? He's painted her dainty, her the sort of curvature of her body and the very idealized nature of her face, the very not dramatic lighting that's been applied to her. And she's standing there on the head of Holofernes, and very often, this scene would be painted after the grisly deed had been done. And one looks at this, and again, her hair is all perfectly in place, and one looks at it and thinks, how could this woman have done this? You look at this painting, and there's no doubt in your mind that that woman is capable of what she is doing right now. This is Judith over here, right? Who's with the sword in hand, which there's no accident that sword looks like a cross, right? it's the Catholic Church after all. And look at her, man. She is determined. Look at these tightened muscles of those arms, right? She's only holding back a little bit because she's like this. I'm trying not to get too messy, but she's not so turned away by that spurt of blood. Like, oh man, that spurt of blood coming from his neck, and all this blood dripping and pooling on the bed itself. She's not so turned off by that she's not going to get this job done. And dude, her handservant, she's got no trouble either, right? That woman is holding this guy down, right? He's struggling, but there's no doubt about it. He ain't going anywhere. He's not going to be able to overcome this woman. She's holding him down really, right? So all these harsh, strong lines, they give us a sense of steadiness and steadfastness and the determination of these two women. And they're shown again to be super powerful. They're going to be able to accomplish this task. And there's Holofernes down there losing his lifeblood, and we know he's not going to get away. Another interesting thing about this particular painting, and she did several versions of this, right? This became a popular scene, so she painted it quite often. I don't know how much I want to get into this. There was one of the artists her father hired to train her was I don't need his entire name. His last name was Tassi. And Tassi, there was an entire court case where Gentileschi was claiming that Tassi had sexually assaulted her while her father was not around. Again, women were considered the property of their fathers, so this was a slight against her father in the 1600s. And so her father was the one who had to sue Tassi. And so the story of the trial is just heartbreaking to read and learn about. The responsibility for proving that that this was true was placed on Artemisia herself, because Tassi tried to claim, no, she came on to me. She's been sleeping with every single one of her teachers. She's just singling me out. And so suddenly everybody turned to her. Well, are you just some slut who was asking for it, right? I'm using the terminology you'd be familiar with today. And she was literally put through torture. Her thumbs were put into thumb screws and were tightened, because the belief was if someone could tell the exact same story while they were in pain, while being tortured, then the story must be true. And think about it. If you're an artist, just what a horrible thing it would be to take your thumbs and risk permanent damage to them over something like this. And so, fortunately, she was vindicated. The courts ruled in her father's favor. But Tassi was not sentenced to prison or anything. He was exiled. He had to leave Bologna. Interestingly, in this painting, Judith over here is a self-portrait of Artemisia, and Holofernes down here looks a lot like Tassi. She would often use Tassi and his very identifiable black locks and black beard as the foil to a lot of her powerful women. I love that little detail. All right. Then good old Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Bernini, as I mentioned earlier, he's the one who worked on the colonnade, was a sculptor of the Baroque era. And his work shows all of the classic characteristics that we talked about when it comes to the characteristics of the Baroque, only in sculpture form. Flesh. Man, if there was one thing that Bernini could do, it was to take hard rock, marble, and make it look like pinchable skin and flesh stretched over fat and muscles. Over there on the left, look at the way those fingers like sink into the skin and pinch in, and the way the skin feels pliable, and the way the body sort of twists. And over here on the right, we have an image. This was one of Bernini's lovers. Yeah, he had his wife, he had his lovers, right? And clearly, Bernini liked his ladies thick. And so his lover here, he sculpts, where we see, again, the pinchableness of, like she doesn't look like she should be made out of hard marble and stone. It looks like if we could reach out and touch the skin, we'd find pinchable cheeks. Those lips are intentionally plump, right? He sees her as this gorgeous woman, and he's showcasing what he enjoys about her, right? Everything about that looks soft and tender, and like that was Bernini's thing, skin and flesh. But also drama and emotion. In both of the painters that we've looked at so far, emotion was the most important thing, and drama was the most important thing. And here is Bernini painting David. Right? And in his case, he gave us a moment that is not the moment after the event has happened. Right? We don't have dead, beheaded Goliath, nor do we have what a lot of artists would do, which was just David staring down Goliath. We have David in the middle of action. Right? And this is a huge, gigantic leap forward from what a lot of sculptors were doing at the time. Because he's not just giving us a statue that just sort of stands firmly in place. He's giving us a piece of sculpture that looks like it's in the middle of movement. It has extension into space. It has torque and twist to it. It gives us a moment in time where the impression here is that David, who is not a child in this case, he seems to be like a man of what, like mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s, who has come up with a cloth that he would have been dressed in, ready for battle, and has just pulled away that cloth, which is still falling. It hasn't even completely fallen off of his body, has grabbed a rock out of his pouch here and has it in a sling and is turning and is just getting ready to send that rock flying. And the tension and the twisting of the body, that is just something you would not have seen in the Renaissance of the time. Right? That indication of motion, like this doesn't feel like a lifeless piece of stone. It feels like we have somehow captured a frame, one brief frame in what was a movement in time. And again, emotion. Look at that, the look of determination on his face as he bites his bottom lip, and the scrunching up of the brows. He's staring down Goliath. Even his hair is swooshing as he's moving, right? So Bernini becomes the darling of the Catholic Church. And if you go to Rome to this day, they will often refer to it as Bernini's Rome, because he has sculptures that are just all over the place. Another of his famous pieces, and this one I love for all the same reasons that I love Caravaggio. Because again, Caravaggio, who's painting these extremely personal and up-close paintings that really meant to showcase God's love for human beings as just human beings, flawed as they may be, while he himself was a horribly flawed man who was constantly getting himself in trouble. Bernini is the darling of the Catholic Church, but he often gets his message across in ways that seem wrong, especially if you're making work for the Catholic Church. Now, in this particular case, this is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. This was actually in a private family chapel. So it's not as if this piece was done for the Catholic Church proper. It was done for the Cornaro family. It was their chapel. Okay, St. Teresa. She was an interesting character. So St. Teresa, she was a Christian mystic nun who had lots of visions and wrote about those visions. This is long, even before the time of Bernini. St. Teresa had this story of how God had chosen her. She was already a nun. She was walking through the halls of her convent one day when suddenly, out of nowhere, an angel appears in front of her and has a giant spear that he just stabs into her heart. And he does it repeatedly, over and over again. And in her description, she describes that every time this spear was stabbed into her chest, she felt more and more of the love of God just being thrown into her body. And she describes it as ecstasy. Right? And after that, she has all these visions. She becomes sort of a prophet, if you will. So the Cornaro family wants this scene in their chapel. They hire Bernini to sculpt it. And he does so. And in the chapel, when I tell you that even in sculpture, the Baroque artists are about drama and stagecraft and things of that nature, you can see that happening here because the sculpture has been placed in what really does look like a stage, right? As if it's happening in a theater. And up above, there's an open portion that goes outward into the light, so this light streams down onto it, giving it this dramatic lighting. Well, this isn't a great example because someone took this photograph with a flash. The light is normally streaming down from above, so there are really interesting and dramatic shadows. And there are even over here to the sides, there are like theater boxes. There are sculptures of members of the Canaro family who are being allowed to be present to view this as it happens. Now, let's say you're Bernini, and you have been put into a position where you have to portray in sculpture something that in the writings of St. Teresa, she described as being extremely, extremely emotional. How are you going to show that? How do you show an internal emotion that is happening, right? Something that is happening spiritually on the inside of a person. How do you showcase that? Well, he did so by taking what's happening internally and putting it right on the outside for everyone to see, right? So we have our angel here, and he has, it doesn't really look like a spear, it looks more like an arrow, but still there he is, he's holding it. And he's reaching down, about to jab this thing right into her chest. And the emotion gets displayed in a number of ways. For one, is the way that the fabric of her habit, she was a nun, the habit is just roiling and bunching and swirling all over the place, right? And that is an indication of what is going on inside of her. But he's Bernini, and Bernini has a tendency, when he has to figure out how to describe something that is ostensibly spiritual, to go for things that human beings will understand on a physical level. So what does he give us here? How does he let us know that what St. Teresa is going through here? This is one of those moments where I so wish we were in the classroom, because I love hearing the reactions of people as I ask this question. All right, here's the question. What is happening to St. Teresa? What is she going through right now? Her head is thrown back. Her eyes are half lidded. Mouth is open in ecstasy. Her head is just like thrown back. Her toes and fingers are curling. And in the classroom, I throw that question out, and sometimes there's someone who's willing to say it, and sometimes the whole group is just snickering, and nobody wants to say it out loud. You know what you're looking at. You just don't want to believe you're looking at it, or you don't want to admit that someone would do something like this. But yes, Bernini has given us a piece of sculpture where we have a nun who's having an orgasm. It's what's happening. If I go back, I mean, hang on, did I have a... Okay, all right. If I go back to the full sculpture here, right? I mean, it's so obvious, right? You got that angel, right? Who's got this spear in his hand. I mean, clearly Bernini read this story and he was like, dude, does anybody you understand? Like she like there was an angel, right? He had like a spear and he was like jabbing that spear into her, and she kept feeling all this love and ecstasy. Like Bernini's looking around like, is anybody else like this is kind of like hot, right? Like I'm not imagining this, am I? And so he paints it. He sculpts it in that way. Right? I mean, that angel is holding that spear, very phallic symbol, about to stab her with it. And he has his hand just ever so slightly pulling away gently the fabric. And he's giving her this look like, yep, yeah, you're going to like this. You're going to enjoy this. And we have to assume he's already done one stab, because she is in an ecstasy here. And he's about to go in for another one. Right? And he gives us this extreme physical reaction that's happening to St. Teresa. She's having an orgasm. He used that. Her, and not just the curling fingers, the curling toes, and the facial expression, but her entire clothing is even having a big orgasm, right? So much so that there's a story about a guy who came to view this piece, and he looked at this, and he said, well, if that right there is supposed to be divine love, well, I know all about that stuff. Because he recognized what he was seeing. Now, why would Bernini do that? Is he just trying to be an asshole? Is he just trying to be like, let me see if I can get away with putting a sculpture in this chapel that has a nun having an orgasm? Or does maybe Bernini not have the hang-ups about that we have? Does he maybe find himself in a position where he needs to show outwardly what is going on with St. Teresa inwardly, or else you won't understand the emotions? And so he finds an intense emotion that human beings can look at and identify with and be like, yeah, I know how that feels. Yeah, I get what's happening there. Oh, wow, that equates with what God is doing in this particular moment. Oh my goodness. All right. No, and so there's a personal and emotional connection to what you see happening in front of you. That's what Bernini seems to want here. And he uses a physical emotion, a physical thing that happens to our bodies that we would all be able to recognize and understand when we see it. Yeah, St. Teresa, man. So in Spain, we're just going to briefly look at Spain. We'll look at one particular painter in Spain. So in the 17th century, Spain, not unlike Italy, is still staunchly Catholic, and was also in control of the Italian region of Naples and the Italian island of Sicily. And so, Italy and Spain are all sort of jumbled up at this period of time. So the new Baroque style of painting spreads from Rome into Spain, well into those particular areas of the Italian peninsula, and then into Spain, where Spanish artists adopt this new style of painting, and very differently from what we're going to see happening in the north. These artists are depending upon the church, but also royal courts for the majority of their commissions. Right? But most of the patronage for these Baroque artists we've been talking about in Italy was the church. The church was seeing this work as their opportunity to win back those who had left them. But in Spain, right, that doesn't compute, right? They're not trying to win people back necessarily in Spain. But this style becomes the style du jour of the royal courts in Spain. And so you get someone like Diego Velázquez, he'll be our one Spaniard that we'll look at. Velázquez was very influenced by Caravaggio from an early age. In the 1620s, he was appointed the court painter of King Philip VI of Spain. To be a court painter meant that you would be hired on, you would live with the royal family, you'd be paid a salary, and so all your paintings that you would be doing would be for the royal family and any of their friends who may want to use your services as well. So it was a cushy job to get. And so he was kept in money and patronage for the rest of his life. He was set. Right? The king at this time owned a lot of late Renaissance paintings from Italy. So Velázquez studied those and became very influenced by that. Then he traveled to Italy, where he got to see a lot of Caravaggio's work up close for the first time and was blown away by that. So his work began to also fall into that vein. So he's very influenced by late Renaissance artists and Caravaggio, and his paintings, particularly this one here, Las Meninas, or the Maids of Honor, from 1656, showcase that. And this particular piece of his is probably one of his most famous pieces. So this is both a group portrait and a royal genre scene. Right? We have the princess here and her maids of honor. These would have been the young girls who were assigned to her. He has this very we didn't look at Titian in this class because Titian was a late Renaissance artist from Venice, but his way of using the light is very Titian-like because he would have been studying the Titians that the king owned at the time. And Titian really loved diffuse light that was bouncing in off of the water of the canals of Venice. And even though that wouldn't have necessarily been the case here, the light does sort of bounce into this room, feeling like it could be coming off of the water outside. As I said, we have the brightest spot in the middle there is Princess Margarita. She's clearly the focus of this painting, and is surrounded by her playmates and a pet, a dog out here. This poor dog, who I love this little detail, is being portrayed by another one of the ladies in waiting, sadly. What makes this painting interesting is then all of the extra layers of what's going on within it. So we see within the painting Velázquez himself standing with his palette and paintbrushes and one paintbrush in hand, poised, ready to dip into the paint and get to work. Right? He has included himself in amongst royalty. It seems like he really wants to showcase his privileged position, right? And he's looking outward toward us. Then, in the distance, we have a mirror. And in that mirror, we can see King Philip IV and his wife, Queen Maria Anna, excuse me. So that seems to suggest, because the way that mirror is situated, is that we are looking through their eyes, right? We are them. Velázquez, as I said, includes himself painting, and we have this gigantic canvas that takes up a huge portion of the painting over here. Now, is he painting the king and queen? Right? Is that why he's looking back at us? Is he about to make a portrait of the king and queen? Or is that the painting? Are we looking at the back of the painting that is the painting that we are looking at here? Did Velázquez do a mind-blowing thing here and include the painting that we're looking at in the painting itself? Right? But that's interesting. Velázquez, he wanted to be a nobleman. He really wanted to be a knight. He wanted the king and queen to knight him so bad. He had aspirations for that, but was thwarted at every turn, sadly. And here, he seems to be pleading his case. Like, look, I'm one of you, right? But he also does this amazing thing where I've heard descriptions of this painting as being a representation of representation. And what do I mean? Well, let's think about what we're seeing within this painting, all right? We are seeing a representation. Representation is a term we use in art to mean that something on the page is meant to look like something from the outside world, or something on the canvas, right? It is representational, right? I can point at it, I can say there's a cow, there's a barn, whatever. We're looking at a representation of the princess and her ladies in waiting, the maids of honor. And we are looking at a representation of Velázquez. Potentially, we are looking at a representation of the painting itself that we're looking at, represented within the painting. So a representation of this representation is represented in the representation. Then we have in the background there a mirror, which is a representation of the reflection of what's happening in the mirror. So a mirror in and of itself is already a representation, right? When you look into a mirror and you see yourself, that's not you. That's light that bounced off of you, hit that mirror, and is bouncing back into your eyes, right? So that's already a representation, and then he painted a representation of it. But it's also a representation of someone who we can't see because we are that person, right? We are the king and queen. It's as if somehow if we could just turn around and look back, we'd see them back there behind us. And then he even has a little door that cuts into another area of another room where there's just a guy, just a random dude, like standing there. And then up on the ceiling, although it's a little hard to see in this, I said on the ceiling, up there on the walls, it's a little hard to see in this painting. But those are up here. These are paintings that the king and queen have by other famous artists. And Velázquez has painted representations of those representations done by other artists that he's painted into this representation of the room. Like all of that is combining into sort of this mind-bending, like what are we even really looking at? For the time, for 1600s, there would be plenty of people who play around with this kind of thing later. But again, is the painting that he's about to paint the painting that we're looking at? And if so, how does it even work that this painting is in the painting? How does it work? We're seeing through the eyes of the king and queen. And again, there's Velázquez showing off that not only can he do all that, but he'll also paint the paintings of other painters on the walls, and he'll do it just as well as they did. 2022, Jason, back here again. So let's take a look now at Northern Europe, and particularly the Netherlands, which at this particular moment in the 17th century was geographically and politically and economically divided. And that's going to be reflected in the art. So I think it's important that we take a look. So during the early Protestant Reformation, the northern provinces of the Netherlands declared independence from Spain. That area had been under the control of Spain for a good long while up until that point. But Spain did maintain the southern provinces, creating a great political and religious divide between the north and the south. The southern Netherlands is referred to as Flanders. Spain and the Catholic Church at the time remained in power, and religious persecution as a result of the Spanish Inquisition became very prevalent in this area. The wealth at the time was in the hands of the ruling class and the church. And artists there are going to be relying mainly on commissions from the church, the state, and the aristocracy. A little different in the northern Netherlands, or what is referred to as the Dutch Republic. We've talked about it a little bit already. Here, there's a bit more religious tolerance. It's mainly a Protestant area, but there's tolerance for Catholic sects as well. Their economy was built on local commerce and trade, and as such, they were independently wealthy apart from the church. Humility and a connection to one's roots were regarded as virtues, because there's that Protestant work ethic that really takes hold in the northern areas of the Dutch Republic, where many of these wealthy individuals might have only recently acquired that wealth, or that wealth might only go back a generation or two. Many of them may be the first in their families to attain this kind of wealth. And it's an interesting sort of cultural trend that happens in the north, where people are wealthy, but they don't want to forget where they came from. And so they want a couple of things. They want to showcase that humility and a connection to their roots, but also to showcase the hard workers that they are. Again, in the north, though, you don't have the church that is wanting to purchase art, at least not as heavily. I mean, the Protestant church isn't really in the market as much. So artists in the north relied heavily on commissions from private citizens, civic groups, and some church patronage. Well, let's look at how that then is reflected in the work made by artists from those different regions. Even as artists begin to work in this Baroque style, they're dealing with a world that is split in that way. So in Flanders, Spanish-controlled Flanders, we have Peter Paul Rubens. And Peter Paul Rubens he's Flemish. Flemish is the term that we use for someone from Flanders, who went to Italy to be trained, and then returned to Flanders, bringing that new Baroque style with him when he came back. Highly influenced by Raphael and Titian in the High Renaissance, but sort of rejecting their mathematical nature and their sense of idealization. but enjoying their sense of light and color and things of that nature. And but he's going to blend that with the Baroque sense of theatricality. We don't see as much in his work of the tenebrism. There's not going to be a lot of people sort of emerging out of shadow into light. Um, and in his case, the realism that we're going to see is the plump nature of the figures that he painted. Rubens, I guess, in keeping with what we said about Bernini, liked his ladies thick. And so a lot of his paintings have very plump ladies in it. So, and I say that, and then I jump straight to a painting that has no plump ladies in it. But here's the Elevation of the Cross by Peter Paul Rubens in 1610. This is his style of Baroque. Again, there's a lot of that tenebrism that we spoke about. Right? There's not a sense of these figures emerging out of the shadows. But this piece, which was the center panel of an altarpiece, he's working in Catholic Flanders. He's having to appeal to Catholic patronage. This would have been in a Catholic church. But again, we're in the North, right? This is just Catholic-controlled North. So this concept of the raising of the cross wasn't used much in art before the Baroque. But the Baroque, loving emotional themes, they kind of really started to dig this idea of portraying the moment that Christ is being hoisted up, because the emotional possibilities of what you could show in the face of Christ as he is praying for the forgiveness of these people who are putting him to death, and the expressions you could put on the faces of the people who are doing this to him, that really appealed to these Baroque artists who loved emotion and wanted to showcase emotion in their work. And again, look, there's this chaotic and this chaotic nature to the composition, right? Like stuff is just like flying all over the place. There's an asymmetry to it where the whole thing is sort of like leaning this direction. It all feels like it could topple over. And that wouldn't have been put up with in the High Renaissance, right? Where compositions were meant to be stable and feel like they were sturdy. He's using chaos and Baroque ideas about movement and action and drama to give us a scene that we can emotionally connect with. And he's not worrying about perfect proportions of human beings, right? He's got these muscular dudes that are bulging muscles in ways that human beings just don't do. And people are twisting in ways that it just isn't supernatural. Well, that aren't very natural for people that stand in these positions, right? That's Rubens' type of Baroque art. And here we have the arrival of Marie de Medici at Marseille. And here down below, I'm going to talk about this first. Down below, here's what I was just talking about. Right? Here is Rubens. If you've ever heard the term Rubenesque used to describe the figure of a woman, that terminology comes from the fact that Rubens used a lot of plump bodies for the female figures in his pieces. So we have these three women down here that have the classic Rubenesque physique. And these he would include these in a lot of his work, right? And that's the realism that he brings to his work. But again, right, the whole scene doesn't have that tenebrism that we were talking about. Rubens doesn't really dive into that as much. He's a little more interested in the way that the late Renaissance treated light and color. And we can see that in these reds and blues that he has that sort of punctuate this image. This depicts the arrival of Queen Marie to Marseille. Right? She had been married to the King of France. This painting was done for the King of France by proxy back in Florence. She's a Medici, which it just occurred to me, unless you were in English 201, the Medici may not know who I'm talking about. The Medici were a very, very, very wealthy family in Renaissance and now Baroque era Italy. So she was married back in Florence by proxy, and then had to be shipped in to France. And by all accounts, it was an uneventful moment, right? Her boat landed, she got off of it, she got into a carriage, she went to the palace, and that was kind of it. But oh no, that is not how we're going to portray it. That is not how Peter Paul Rubens, when given the opportunity, is going to portray this event, right? Where literally she is being greeted by the personification of France. Here, wearing this coat with all of the fleur-de-lis on it, the cape over his body, right? He is the embodiment, the personification of France, welcoming her in with open arms. In addition to that, this sort of angel creature up here with the horns, that is the personification of fame. So even fame flies overhead and heralds her arrival. And again, down below, we have ancient Greek and Roman gods who have arisen to witness this moment and are there for it. And just the pomp and circumstance of it all for what was genuinely an uneventful moment in history, but Rubens has given it this grand, romantic grandeur. Right? It's emotional, much more emotional than the actual event was. Then let's jump up into the Dutch Republic, and we'll take a look specifically at Rembrandt van Rijn. Rembrandt van Rijn. If you just remember Rembrandt, you'll be fine. He is referred to as Rembrandt. A lot of these artists in this period we sort of think of as just one name. Rembrandt, born in 1606 and died in 1669. And he was a Dutch Baroque draftsman and painter, and this extremely important figure in Western art history. I mean, come on. Surely you have heard of his name. It's not like I'm giving you a name you've never heard of, right? Not unlike the four Ninja Turtles, Rembrandt is a name sort of synonymous with art. A lot of people will say, like, he's no Rembrandt or anything, blah, blah, blah. Right? Like that term gets bandied about. And he was considered the most important Dutch artist. He was he was forefront of a movement that gets referred to as the Dutch Golden Age. This was this era of extreme wealth for the Dutch Republic, and there were starting to be these innovative artists who emerged during this time, who were bringing new techniques and new genres to art because, again, up here, they're not appealing to the church. What they need is the patronage of newly wealthy individuals and civic groups, and cities, for that matter. That's who they need the patronage of. He, again, highly influenced by Caravaggio, and you can see it even in that self-portrait of his right there, where that tenebrism is palpable, right? He is emerging out of this darkness. That's very reminiscent of what we saw Caravaggio doing. But he's in the north. He's also looking at Rubens, and he likes some of what he sees Rubens doing as well. So he's very influenced by the two of them. But he developed his own very unique style. That extreme tenebrism, as I mentioned, that realism, and in his case, that realism is a bit different from what we saw happening in Italy. What Rembrandt was extremely good at doing was balancing wealth and power with humility and that Protestant work ethic. And he arrived at the perfect moment where that's exactly what that's exactly what the wealthy class at the time wanted. Because they were wealthy, but for many of them, they might only be a generation or two into that wealth, and some of them, they may be the first in their family to have achieved that wealth. And there's, again, that Protestant work ethic where nobody wants to come across as being too prideful. And yet they want art that displays their wealth. And so Rembrandt comes along at this perfect moment where exactly what's being expected and what's being desired is a means of giving these particular individuals paintings that say, I am wealthy and I am important, but I am also humble and haven't forgotten where I came from. And Rembrandt was a genius at doing that. But he also had this gestural impasto paint application. Now, what do I mean when I say impasto? I-M-P-A-S-T-O. Impasto. It's an Italian term, but essentially what it means is that the paint gets really thickly piled up on the canvas. Right? And Rembrandt had this way of painting where the resulting image looked very realistic, and yet if one looked closely, one would see all this piled up paint that was brushed on in very quick gestural strokes. So for comparison, we'll take a look here. This is a painting by Raphael in the High Renaissance, right? So this is what's immediately preceding the Baroque. You look at this painting, and Raphael here is also he's completely and utterly ripping off Leonardo da Vinci. But still, what he's doing here, right? He is trying to paint in such a way as to be as smooth as possible, right? So that the transitions between where light and shadow are blended very, very, very softly. And when we look at this, with the exception of maybe the little strands of hair, we don't really see brushstrokes because the goal would have been to create an image that fools your eye into believing it's not a painting, right? Rembrandt, not so much. I mean, look at that. Look at the way the paint is just piled on. You can see the thickness of the paint on the canvas. And you can see his very quick strokes. He doesn't care if you see his paint strokes, right? Or his brush strokes. You can literally see where the brush moved. One of my favorite little details of this particular painting is the way he did this light that's hitting this kind of turban kind of thing that he's wearing on his head. And you can see where he just took up the paintbrush and went bam, bam. There's just a couple of real quick kind of strokes. You can see them there. You can see all of the places where his paintbrush touched the canvas and that skin, right? And you can see the way the paint is piled on. You can see there are colors of paint underneath that show through, colors of paint that have been applied on top. That's impasto, that thickness of the paint. And gestural is the way that he's moving his hand in very quick motions, and he doesn't try to hide it, right? Versus, again, 100 years before him, that smoothness that's being done by Raphael here. And so we get a painting like this one here, this portrait of Nikolaus Rutz, where this would have been a private commission. Right? It would have, Rutz himself would have commissioned this painting. And this was the kind of painting that Rembrandt became known for and made him a celebrity in his own time. Because Rutz is a very wealthy man. He's a very wealthy man. And in case we had any doubt about what he does, what his business is, let me just say he was a fur trader. Now, if we didn't know that, we'd have a lot of indications for it. An art historian that I particularly enjoy, whose work I particularly enjoy, Simon Schauma, says of this painting, it is the hairiest painting in all of Western art, right? And look at it. I mean, there's fur everywhere. He's wearing the fur coat. He's wearing fur on what seems to be his sleeves. There's fur lining. The hat is fur. Even Nikolaus Rutz's face is furry, right? And he's got that sheer amount of detail and texture in there. So we know what this man's business is, right? But he's wealthy and successful, and yet he's been placed in this very cold and detailless environment, right? There's nothing back there that showcases his wealth other than what he is wearing, right? He's not surrounded by his belongings. I don't know, he doesn't have his yacht in the background somewhere. I don't know if he had a yacht, it's just me talking. But anyway, nothing is back there showcasing his wealth. In fact, what we do have is this piece of paper he's holding, which was a ledger of receipts. So what we have been given here is this moment where we have been made to look like, it's been made to look like Nicolaus here was reading up an important business document, right? Working hard, doing his business, and we have stepped in and interrupted him in the middle of that. And so he's just looked away from his work to give us a moment of his time. And he looks slightly frustrated, but not angry that we have interrupted that moment. We almost feel like we want to apologize. Like, oh, I'm so sorry for intruding. Thank you for a moment of your time. So that Ruth is shown to be a hard worker. He's shown to be wealthy, but also shown to be humble, given his surroundings. But yeah, a hard worker. He was busy doing his work, checking on his business and tallying his receipts when we stepped in and interrupted. Rembrandt, like I said, he becomes a huge celebrity in his time, but then he starts to get a little too experimental with his work. Not too experimental for my taste. I love what the guy's doing. But at the time, given that clientele that we spoke about and what they want to see, his work is taking on an air that they don't like, and it starts to be the downfall of his success. This is a painting that begins to go in that direction. This is the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, an extremely famous painting now at this time. At the time, Dr. Tulp here wanted to, commissioned a painting of him and his class, his students, right? As he was a medical professor. What we can imagine Dr. Tulp thought he was going to get would be a series of portraits of them just sort of sitting, like, I mean, think about any photograph of a class, right? Everybody's arranged nice and neatly, right? And that's most likely what he thought he was going to get, not what was actually given to him, right? And when he received this painting, the story goes that he and everyone else involved in it was a little taken aback, right? We thought this was supposed to be a painting of us as a class of medical professionals learning our trade. And, Rembrandt, what's up with just the big giant dead body right there smack dab in the middle of this whole thing? And it's the brightest thing on the canvas, right? You can't miss it. There it is, right? We weren't expecting that. And then on top of that, you have Dr. Tulp himself, who's in the total stereotypical professor mode, right? The professor pose of, blah, 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 let me teach, and blah, 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 and I'm going to look you directly in the eyes. I'm going to look off into the cosmos from which I am receiving my inspiration. And then the students themselves are a little offended because they look pretty dumb, right? You got one guy here who's like, right? You got this guy who's paying attention to us, this guy too, for that matter, who are paying attention to us, who seem to have stepped in and not to the lesson. A couple of other people who just seem distracted, right? And they're like, that's not us. That's not how we do things. Yeah, but Dr. Tulp's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, it's Rembrandt. I mean, the dude's famous. Who am I to question? And he paid for it, right? Another thing that happens in Rembrandt's time. Rembrandt and most of the artists that we have looked at thus far considered themselves, their name was more a brand than anything else. Rembrandt becomes famous enough that he can hire on assistants. And he teaches those assistants how to paint like Rembrandt. And so anytime you see any paintings from his most successful periods, we can assume that maybe a good 70% of the painting is done by him, and the other 30%, maybe even more, might even be a good 60-40 split, would have been done by the people he's trained to paint like him. Because the painting being signed by a Rembrandt at this particular moment in time wouldn't have been considered a slight to those people who painted on it and didn't get to sign their names, because Rembrandt was the brand. Rembrandt's name being on work was a marker of quality. It was a brand. Nobody was looking at this and thinking Rembrandt painted every single stroke on this. They understood that he had people that were helping him to work. And he was receiving so many commissions because he was just that famous at the time that he needed that in order to produce them at the quantities and with the speed with which he was accomplishing them. But as I said, he became more and more experimental with his work, and people began to not pay attention. And toward the end of his life, he was sadly bankrupt and had to start selling off all of his worldly possessions. And so one thing that's really intriguing to look at when it comes to Rembrandt is his self-portraits over the course of his life. So over here to the left, we've got Rembrandt van Rijn, his self-portrait from 1634. He's a young buck, right? Just starting out in the world, trying to make a name for himself. And you look at that, just that cocky look on his face, right? He's very sure of himself, but you can also see that he is not wealthy, at least not super wealthy yet in that, right? Or at least he's portraying himself as not super wealthy. Right? Those same kind of, he has aspirations of wealth. He has certainly got some fur on his shoulder there, but he's portrayed himself in that same manner that he would portray a lot of his sitters when he did their portraits. Then, 1658 there, he's at the height of his career, and look at Rembrandt van Rijn there. Rembrandt is decked out in gold and finery, and he's even painted his portrait as if we're ever so slightly below him, looking up at him, where we don't get that in that first one, right? Here's a man who is showing off his wealth in a way that's very different from how he was portraying others early on in his career. And it's not long after that that he starts to fall out of favor. And artists start to see a lot of the work that he was doing as being goofy, or at least no longer meeting their needs of showcasing who and what they are as wealthy individuals or as a civic group or what have you, while also showcasing humility. And you can see it happening also in his own work, or in his own self-portrait, where he's not even portraying himself in that way. Then 1669, the last year of his life. Look at that portrait there. Let me move myself out of the way so we can see it better. Right? Old, gray-haired, not holding back from showing us the wrinkles. Clothing is humble. Hands are held in a humble gesture. The look on his face is nowhere near as cocky as that or as disdainful as that. Suddenly that humility has returned. And yes, toward the end of his life, he was trying so hard to regain the patronage that he had once had. He seems to be suggesting with a painting like that, like, here I am. I'm sorry. I forgot for a moment. Please, please hire me again. I will give you the thing that you want. Here I am. I have been humbled. And again, he would die shortly after this particular portrait. So there it is. The Baroque era. As I said, an era I absolutely love. I love the work. I love the emotional themes. I love the way that the stories of the artists themselves are so important to the work that we see because of the emotional connections that these artists had to their work. Hopefully some of that transferred. Maybe you come away with an appreciation for this in the way that I do. I don't know. Here's hoping. Thank you for going down this lane with me and putting up with my wild antics as I talk about this stuff. I love it. I love it. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.